When Frances Hutchins died, her family divided the estate equally. 7 years later, her granddaughter Clara discovered they had missed something. A fortune worth millions, hidden in a farmhouse no one knew existed. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Clara Hutchins stood at the end of her driveway in the thin March cold, holding a cream-colored envelope with no return address. Her name was written across the front in handwriting so precise it looked less like correspondence and more like a statement of intent. In her other hand, a disconnection notice from the electric company. She looked at both for a moment before going inside. She set the disconnection notice on the kitchen counter with the others. She sat down at the table and opened the cream envelope. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, printed with the name and address of a law firm in Cookeville, Tennessee. Alderman, Goss, and Hale, attorneys at law. And below that, 3 sentences typed in a plain, unhurried font. We represent the estate of your late grandmother, Frances Elaine Hutchins. The estate includes assets which have remained unclaimed for a period of 7 years. We respectfully request your presence at our offices at your earliest convenience. That was all. No amount. No description. No indication of what unclaimed assets meant in practical terms. Whether it was a cedar chest of costume jewelry, or something that would change the way Clara breathed when she thought about the next 12 months. She read it twice, set it on the table, and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard where her son Marcus, 6 years old, was pushing a toy truck through the dead grass. With the focused intensity of a child who had not yet learned to worry about the future, because the adults around him had not yet run out of ways to hide it from him. Clara Hutchins was 38 years old. She had $214 in a checking account, a mortgage that was 4 months behind, and a job at the Whitfield County Administrative Office that paid $31,000 a year before taxes, and had recently reduced her hours by 8 per week, due to what her supervisor called budget restructuring, and what Clara called the reason she was eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch 4 days out of 5. Her husband Kevin had left 14 months ago. Not dramatically, not with a fight or a revelation, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a man who had already made his decision long before he announced it, and was simply waiting for a moment that felt administratively convenient. He had taken his truck, his tools, and his income, and he had left Clara the mortgage, the minivan with the cracked windshield, and Marcus, who was the only part of the arrangement Clara did not resent, even slightly. She had not heard from Kevin in 11 weeks. She read the letter a third time, and then she called the number on the card. The receptionist at Alderman, Goss and Hale was professional and pleasant, and entirely uninformative. She confirmed that the letter was legitimate, confirmed that Clara's presence was requested, and offered an appointment the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. She did not answer any of Clara's 3 increasingly specific questions about the nature of the estate or the value of the unclaimed assets. The attorney will explain everything when you come in, she said, with the particular warmth of someone trained to say exactly this, and nothing more. Clara drove to Cookeville on Tuesday, in the minivan with the cracked windshield. Marcus dropped at her neighbor Debbie's house with his backpack and his toy truck and strict instructions to be good, which he always was. The drive was 2 hours and 20 minutes. She listened to the radio for the first hour and drove in silence for the second, because somewhere around the halfway point, her thoughts got louder than anything the radio was offering. Her grandmother Frances had died 7 years ago, Clara had been 21 at the time, newly married, distracted with the particular self-absorption of a young woman who believes the future is a thing that will simply arrive and arrange itself. She had attended the funeral in Cookeville, had stood at the graveside with her mother and her Aunt Roberta and Roberta's two sons, her cousins Boyd and Garrett, and had felt the loss as something real but distant. The way you feel the losses of old people when you're young. And the idea of mortality still feels like something that happens to other families. Frances had been 81, sharp-minded and private, and not given to sentimentality. A woman who had lived alone in the same house for 50 years and conducted her affairs with a self-sufficiency that brooked no interference. The will reading had been brief. Frances had left her personal belongings to be divided among family members as agreed. She had left small cash amounts to Clara's mother and to Roberta. She had left the house to be sold, with the proceeds split equally among her surviving children. She had left nothing to Clara specifically. Clara had not expected anything. She had been 21. She had not thought about it again. Until Thursday, when the cream-colored envelope appeared in her mailbox between the electric bill and the silence where her husband's income used to be. The law office was on the third floor of a brick building 2 blocks from the Cookeville courthouse. The attorney who met her was a woman named Sylvia Goss, late 60s, silver-haired, with reading glasses on a chain, and the precise, unhurried manner of someone who had spent 40 years watching people receive information that rearranged their lives, and had learned exactly how much space to give them when it happened. She shook Clara's hand and gestured to the chair across from her desk. The office smelled of old leather and strong coffee. Outside the window, Cookeville moved through its Tuesday morning. Ordinary, unhurried, unaware that Clara's life was about to change. Completely. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Hutchins," Sylvia said, settling into her own chair and opening a file that was considerably thicker than Clara had expected. "Before we begin, I want to ask you something." A pause. "In the 7 years since your grandmother's death, has any member of your family mentioned to you the existence of a second property?" Clara looked at her. "A second property?" she repeated. Sylvia Goss held her gaze steadily. "Your grandmother owned 2 properties at the time of her death, Mrs. Hutchins. The house that was sold and divided among her children." She paused. "And one other." She leaned forward with the careful precision of someone who understood the weight of what came next. "The other property was not included in the will reading your family attended. It was held in a separate trust with separate instructions, and it has been waiting for 7 years for you, specifically." The office was very quiet. "For me," Clara said. "For you," Sylvia confirmed. "By name. Your grandmother was extremely specific." Clara sat with this for a moment. Outside the third-floor window, Cookeville went about its Tuesday morning, traffic moving, people walking, the ordinary machinery of a world that did not know it had just shifted slightly on its axis. For one woman sitting in a law office chair with a cracked windshield minivan in the parking garage, and $214 in her checking account. "What is the property?" Clara asked. Sylvia Goss turned a page in the file. "That," she said, "is where it becomes complicated." The property was 40 minutes outside Cookeville. The last 2 miles were red clay track, winding through dense timber. Clara's minivan protested every pothole. She'd read the file twice before leaving the parking garage. The property was listed in the trust documents as Holloway Farm. 6.8 acres of mixed land in White County, Tennessee, including a primary residential structure, 2 outbuildings, and a parcel of creek-fed bottomland that the 1987 survey had assessed as agriculturally significant. Frances Hutchins had purchased it in 1971. For reasons the trust documents did not explain. She had paid the property taxes on it every year for 52 years, without exception. Through illness and widowhood, and the long, quiet decades of her solitude. Right up until the year she died. After her death, the trust had continued paying the taxes automatically from a dedicated account Frances had funded specifically for that purpose. An account, Sylvia had explained with the measured tone of someone delivering information they understood would land hard. That currently held just over $4,000. Frances had thought of everything. Clara had thought of very little else for the 40 minutes since leaving Cookville. The farmhouse appeared through the pines, like a photograph coming into focus. White clapboard, gray with weather. Tin roof still intact. A covered porch running the full width. And on it, 2 wooden rockers, positioned as if someone had just stepped inside and would be back with lemonade any moment. Clara killed the engine. The house looked like it had been waiting. She got out into the cold March air. The land around the house was overgrown, but not wild. The difference between a garden that has been left alone and one that has been abandoned. And Clara understood instinctively that these were not the same thing. The bones of deliberate planting were still visible under the years of unchecked growth. Fruit trees along the south fence line. A kitchen garden plot behind the house, still edged with flat stones, someone had set by hand. A stone path from the drive to the porch steps, heaved up in places by frost, but continuous, unbroken. Frances had loved this place. That was the thing that hit Clara, standing in the March cold with the file folder under her arm. Not the mystery of why it had been hidden, or what it was worth, or what any of it meant for the $214 in her checking account and the 4 months behind mortgage. Just the simple, sudden, aching certainty that her grandmother had loved this piece of land with the specific private intensity of someone who loves a thing they have decided the world does not get to have an opinion about. Clara walked up the porch steps. The front door key was on a ring in the file folder, tagged in Sylvia's handwriting. It turned easily, as though the lock had been maintained. The door opened inward onto a front room that smelled of cedar and old paper, and something faintly floral that Clara could not immediately identify. She stepped inside. The house was furnished. Not emptied, not stripped. Furnished, completely. As though Frances had simply walked out one day and not returned. A horsehair sofa against the front room wall, with a quilt folded across the back. A round oak table in the dining area set with 4 chairs, a ceramic pitcher in the center, still holding the dried remains of wildflowers. Bookshelves on either side of the fireplace filled completely, the spines of the books faded but upright and organized. And on the mantelpiece, a collection of small framed photographs arranged with the careful intentionality of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted to look at when she sat by a fire. Clara crossed to the mantelpiece and looked at the photographs. Most of them she did not recognize. People from her grandmother's life before Clara existed, faces she had no names for. But in the center of the arrangement, slightly larger than the others, was a photograph she knew. Her own face. Age 7 or 8. Sitting in what she now recognized as one of the 2 rocking chairs on the front porch. Squinting into the sun and grinning the unguarded grin of a child who does not know she is being photographed. Clara had no memory of this place. She stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she went to find the outbuildings. The first was an equipment shed, empty except for rusted hand tools hanging on the wall, and a workbench along the back with a collection of mason jars, still neatly arranged on a shelf above it. The second outbuilding was smaller, set further back from the house. and its door was padlocked, with a lock that was newer than anything else on the property. A heavy steel padlock that was entirely inconsistent with the age of everything surrounding it. Clara stood in front of it and looked at the lock, and then looked at the key ring from Sylvia's file folder. There were 3 keys on it. The first had opened the front door. She tried the second on the padlock. It opened. She pulled the door toward her. The outbuilding was a single room, approximately 12 feet square, with a concrete floor that was completely out of keeping with the rough-framed timber walls around it. Poured and finished with a smoothness that suggested professional work. Recent work. Against the far wall, taking up nearly a third of the floor space, were filing cabinets. 4 of them, steel, locked, arranged with the same deliberate order as the bookshelves in the house. Beside the filing cabinets, on a wooden pallet to keep it off the concrete, was a fireproof document safe. Black, the kind sold specifically for the long-term preservation of paper records. On top of the safe was an envelope, Clara's name on the front, her grandmother's handwriting. Her hands were not entirely steady when she opened it. Clara, if you're reading this, then Sylvia has done her job and you have done yours, which is to say, you came here yourself instead of sending someone. I knew you would. You were always the one who came to see for herself. I am going to tell you something that your mother and your Aunt Roberta do not know, and which I made certain they would never find out, because what I am about to tell you would have been taken from you before you were old enough to protect it. This land is not simply a farm. In 1962, I discovered, through a survey I commissioned privately, that the creek running along the eastern boundary of this property sits atop a mineral deposit. I had it assessed by 2 independent geologists whose reports are in the filing cabinet on the left, top drawer. I then did nothing with this information for 60 years. I did nothing because I understood that the moment this information became known, it would be taken by my children, by the county, by whoever had the better lawyers and the faster reflexes. I was not willing to let it be taken. So I waited. I kept the land. I kept the secret. And I left it to you, because you are the only one in this family who ever came and sat quietly and listened instead of talking. And I always believed that was the quality most likely to survive what comes next. A pause. The 3rd key on the ring opens the safe. Be careful who you tell. Francis. Clara stood in the concrete-floored outbuilding in the March cold, with her grandmother's letter in her hands, and the sound of the creek moving along the eastern boundary, somewhere beyond the tree line. And she understood with the full weight of it settling through her, that the $214 in her checking account was no longer the most important number in her life. She reached for the 3rd key. The safe opened on the first try. Inside were 2 manila envelopes. A bound geological survey report with a blue cover, and a smaller envelope containing a single folded document that Clara recognized, even before she opened it, as something prepared by a lawyer. The particular weight of the paper, the formal density of the type. She took everything out carefully and set it on the workbench beside the door, arranging it in the order that felt logical. The order of someone who had learned in the past hour to treat each new piece of information as something that required its full moment before the next one arrived. She opened the geological survey first. It was dated 1963. The cover page identified the commissioning party as Francis E. Hutchins and the assessing firm as Caldwell Geological Associates of Nashville, Tennessee. Clara flipped through technical jargon, core samples, mineral composition charts. Then she found page 11 and sat down hard on the concrete floor. High-grade silica. Lithium-bearing clay. Extending a quarter mile along the creek bed. In 1963, this had been interesting. In 2024, with electric vehicles consuming lithium at rates that had made it one of the most sought minerals on the continent. This was a fortune. Clara sat on the concrete floor of her dead grandmother's outbuilding and breathed carefully and deliberately. The way you breathe when you're trying to keep your thinking clear. Because your thinking has never mattered more than it does in this exact moment. She drove back to Cookville. She sat in Sylvia Goss's office for the second time that day and set the geological survey and the 2 manila envelopes on the desk between them. The first manila envelope contained the second geological assessment, commissioned by Francis in 1989, 26 years after the first, from a different firm, confirming and expanding the original findings with updated methodology. The deposit was larger than the 1963 survey had indicated. The second firm's report noted that the lithium-bearing clay formation extended beyond the original estimated boundary, running not only along the creek bed, but beneath the adjacent bottomland parcel that the 1987 agricultural survey had assessed as significant, without understanding precisely why. The second manila envelope contained correspondence, 12 letters, spanning from 1971 to 2019, between Francis Hutchins and 3 separate mining and resource companies who had, at various points over 50 years, approached her about the property. Each letter was a variation on the same exchange. The company expressing interest, making an offer, and Francis declining, in language that was always courteous and entirely final. The offers in the early letters were in the tens of thousands. By 2019, the most recent offer, from a company Clara, did not recognize whose letterhead identified them as a subsidiary of a larger energy resources corporation, was for $4.2 million. Francis had declined that one too. She had declined it 8 months before she died. She was waiting, Clara said. Sylvia looked up from the correspondence. For the right time, Clara said. Or the right person. Sylvia's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. Yes, this is she. Her expression darkened as she listened. She hung up and looked at Clara. That was a mining company called Silverton Resources. They're offering $12 million for mineral rights to the Holloway property. She paused. They want an answer in 48 hours. Clara's stomach dropped. How do they even know about it? Mining surveys are public record, Sylvia said quietly. The moment Francis filed her claim in 1952, it became discoverable. She paused, and they said if you decline, they'll be reaching out to your cousins to negotiate access through adjacent land. Clara felt ice in her veins. She had 48 hours before her family found out what she discovered. That night, Clara's phone rang. Boyd, her cousin. She hadn't heard from him since Grandma's funeral 7 years ago. She answered. Clara, hey. His voice was friendly, too friendly. Look, I heard some weird rumor about Grandma's old property. Something about mineral rights? Clara said nothing. The thing is, Boyd continued, Mom always said Grandma promised her that land. So if there's anything valuable there, we should probably split it, right? Family's family. Grandma left it to me specifically, Boyd. Silence. Then his voice changed. Colder? You sure you want to do this? Garrett and I have a lawyer. We can make this really expensive for you, Clara. She thought about the photograph on the mantel. 7-year-old her, squinting into the sun. Sitting in a rocking chair on a porch. She didn't remember. Grandma had remembered. See you in court, Boyd. She hung up. 3 months later, the acquisition agreement was signed. Clara sat in a conference room in Nashville, pen in hand. Sylvia beside her. Across the table, executives from Silverton Mining Corporation. The terms were not made public. What Clara would later tell people, when she bothered to tell them anything, was simple. Marcus's college was paid for. The mortgage was cleared. And she'd kept 1 acre of Holloway farm for herself. The acre with the porch. And the 2 rocking chairs. She signed. Boyd and Garrett's lawsuit was dismissed 3 weeks later. The trust was airtight. Grandma had been meticulous. Boyd sent one final text. Hope it was worth it. Clara deleted it without responding. She had no interest in revenge. She had no interest in gloating. She simply had no interest in them. At all. 4 months later, Clara stood on the newly cleared acre, watching geologists set up drilling equipment on the eastern boundary. The mining operation would be contained to the creek parcel. The farmhouse, the stone path, the fruit trees along the fence line. Those would remain untouched. Exactly as Frances had left them. She still worked at the clinic. She liked her job. Marcus's college fund was managed by professionals now, and the mortgage company no longer sent disconnection notices. But Clara had not changed the fundamental architecture of her life. Because the fundamental architecture of her life had never been the problem. The problem had been the fear that it would collapse. That fear was gone. She drove out to the farm on the first warm Saturday in May, with Marcus and a thermos of coffee, and sat in one of the rocking chairs while he ran through the long grass along the fence line, arms out, making the sound of an airplane. Entirely unconcerned with the future in the way of children who have been quietly, completely protected from the worst of it. The creek moved along the eastern boundary. The fruit trees along the south fence were blooming. Clara rocked slowly in her grandmother's chair and drank her coffee. And thought about Frances, who had loved this land privately and fiercely and with the particular devotion of someone who understood that the things worth protecting are always the things the world most wants to take, who had kept a secret for 50 years, not out of bitterness, but out of patience, who had taken one photograph of a 7-year-old girl squinting into the sun on this porch, and had kept it at the center of her mantelpiece for 30 years, because she had already decided long before anyone else knew there was anything to decide. Some people leave you money. Some people leave you land. Frances Hutchins had left her granddaughter something rarer than either. The proof that someone had seen her clearly, long before she had learned to see herself, and had spent a lifetime making certain that when the moment came, she would have everything she needed to stand her ground. Marcus came running back across the grass, flushed and grinning, and vaulted onto the porch and into the other rocking chair with the boneless ease of a 6-year-old who has never once doubted he was welcome. "Can we come back?" he asked. Clara looked at the blooming trees and the long grass and the creek she could hear but not quite see from here, moving steadily along the boundary of what was hers. "Yes," she said. "We can always come back. Because inheritance isn't just about what's handed to you. It's about what someone believed you were strong enough to carry." Her grandmother had given her more than mineral rights. She had given her a test. She had given her the choice to walk away or to dig deeper. Clara had chosen to dig. And beneath the surface, hidden for 50 years in a farmhouse no one knew existed, she had found not just fortune, but proof that she had been worth fighting for all along.